He is consultant to various large corporations, and academically he is also affiliated and teaches at doctoral level at the Lyon Business School in France, and also the Cattolica University of Milan. He studied, well, I'll probably tell you more about this, but his background is really very, very broad. He studied philosophy and also taught digital humanities at the University of Sassari in Cagliari, with which our department has long-standing relations and collaboration. And he also studied strategies for cybersecurity awareness in Paris, and his PhD is in cyber geography with very strong philosophical elements, of course, because Enrico is a philosopher who moved into the technical side of things and was amongst the pioneers in this field, which we call AI ethics, right, as an AI ethicist. He's the founder of a consultancy firm, beethical.be, which works, as I said, with large companies on AI and data ethics issues. He's a member of the French National Committee on AI, chair of the AI Enhanced Nudges, and co-chair of the requirements on the competences of AI ethicists, which is the European body of standardization. He's a board member and a fellow for Humanity, which is an organization dedicated to the development of independent audits for AI. And since 2022, he has been the president of the Association of AI Ethicists. So there are very few people we could think of who could give the seminar and run this course in our MA. And welcome again, Enrico, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jean-Paul, Claude, and François for the invitation. I'll try to raise my voice, but I was a bit sick last week, so sorry if you cannot listen. So today we are going to talk about the European approach to AI, and we'll do it starting from what is the European regulation, going through standard, and a bit through the innovation myth that we are talking a lot in Europe about the AI, and finally we'll try to find the space of AI ethics in all those contexts. And this is quite interesting because it's a context that has got a very important geopolitical impact and also economical and social for social aspects. So let's start from the regulation in Europe. As you may know, Europe is important because of the European single market. So basically we created Europe to have a space where we can change services and goods using the same regulation. And this was the main driver of the majority of regulation we had in Europe until now. And generally it works like that. The European Commission starts an initiative and starts to write a draft of the regulation, and the regulation then is discussed by the European Parliament and the Council of Europe. That's not to be confused with the Europe Council, that is another organization. And then after a lot of amendment and agreements, they arrive to a kind of trilogue where we sit together around the table and they write a final regulation. So this is how they generally work when they are producing a regulation. This is also the process for producing the Artificial Intelligence Act that is going to regulate system at high risk in Europe. Now, whenever the process is like that, there is a weight of the proof, of the evidence that is put on the company. That means that each company should demonstrate to be compliant with the regulation. And this has been like that until a few years ago, when they started to say, why we do not think something better for the European regulation that can be easier for company to apply. And so they started to have what they call a better regulation. So they said, why we do not try not to be inconsistent in the regulation we are doing, we have to ensure that everything is based on evidence, not only regulation written by a regulator, but also something applicable by the industry. And let's try to make it simple and better and avoid the unnecessary burden that generally the regulation have for the industry. And finally, let's involve also citizens in the process of writing those regulations. And this brought to what is called the new legislative framework. The new legislative framework basically is saying that we are reinforcing the market with a group of regulations that are aligned and harmonized. And that's the big difference with the past in Europe. And so they started to say that the legislation should be aligned, we have to focus on accreditation, and we have to produce mark surveillance, the CE mark for every product we are producing, etc. So this was the big change that we had during the last year. We moved from a normal regulation to a new legislative framework. But the real big change with the new legislative framework was that they decide to put in any new regulation only essential requirements, so very high-level requirements. And those essential requirements should then be transformed in technical requirements so that the industry could apply those technical requirements. So basically, the high-level regulation is saying that AI system should be accurate, and the technical requirements are going to say how they have to be accurate, what are the metrics to be accurate. And in this way, the industry has got the technical requirement to comply with, and not only legislative high-level requirements. And it's easy for the industry, because instead of talking only with lawyers, they have the real technical requirements, so they know what they have to do. So this is a big change in the infrastructure of the regulation in Europe, because we moved a big relevance on several standard developing organizations that are the group that are creating the standards with the technical specification. And basically they are creating what are called HEN, Harmonized European Norm. Okay? And so the technical specifications are that one that are used by companies. And this is how it works. So in the EU Act, for example, there is a very specific article, that is the Article 42, that is saying that if you are complying with the standard, then there is a presumption of conformity with the regulation. So we are moving the burden of the evidence, the proof, to the regulation, from the regulation to the standards. And this is changing the game in the European industry. And it's quite important because it's also giving, from a legislative or even a philosophical point of view, is moving a lot of power from the regulator to a group of industry or people that are creating standards. So there are also problems related to that. But in this case, we moved the burden of the proof to the controller, not more to the industry. And so the industry can develop better in Europe. This is the base and the philosophy behind all this process. Now, why I'm starting technical, it's not very philosophical, even there are a lot of philosophical problems that are related to this concept. But what is important is to understand that all this process is much more complex than we can imagine. So basically we have a lot of commission, main committees that are worked to create the legislation that, to be direct with you and completely honest, is not the better legislation in the world. It's a legislation that was created with a lot of technical and theoretical problems. But by the way, they created it and they moved everything to the standardization bodies. And now my question is going to be, if you know any standardization body. Have you ever heard of standardization body? Anybody of you? ISO, okay? For example, ISO is an international one. And then you have a list of bodies that I will show in the next slides. And so we'll have a big picture of what we are doing with the standard. In Europe, we have a strategy for the digital, a complex strategy. And we are trying to cover all the different aspects of the digital. So for example, the privacy, everybody knew about the GDPR, okay? Because it's already applied. But then we have a strategy for data, cybersecurity, and digital service pack. It's about big companies and the service they are offering in Europe. And then we have the AI strategy that brought to the AI regulation. This means that they developed the AI Act. In that regulation, for the first time, we have the new legislative framework. It's not the same for the GDPR or other, for example. But in the regulation, we have this one. And that means that this regulation is quite complex because they asked to create related standards to the regulation. And I'll show you how they are created. So we are talking a lot about standards. I asked if you know something, some standardization, standards organization, but let's just do a step backward and understand what are standards, okay? To understand why they are important, because we talk a lot about standards, but where they are used and when they started. Everybody knows the French Revolution, okay? The French Revolution was a revolution that changed completely the organization in France. 1789, they just arrived to cut the head of the king and the queen. But what they did a few years later is much more interesting than what they did during the revolution. They started to define the metric system just a few years later. So in 93, they defined the meter, in 95, the kilograms and the liter. And wow, suddenly we had a measure to have, to allow people to commerce with a high level of trust. A meter was a meter everywhere in France. Okay? A liter was a liter everywhere in France. Nobody could just cheat on that. We had standardized measures. It was the first time in history. It was so good that they deployed it quite everywhere in the world. Quite everywhere, not in 3 or 4 countries, but quite everywhere. This was good for the economy because we could trade with Brazil using the same measures. Okay? It was much easier. And that's when the economy started really to develop in a good way. I live in France, they are so proud to have done it. It became a kind of syndrome for French people. They want to standardize everything, and a lot of time they cannot do it. An example is the keyboard. The French keyboard is different from the keyboard around the world. Okay, they use the AZERTY instead of the QWERTY system. So just to give you an example. And they did a lot of stuff like that, so it's always F5. But they were right in this case. Having a standardized system of measure could help the economy to develop. And let's start again with the question about the organization that develop standards. I quoted ISO, as some of you knew or at least heard about it. But in reality, we had hundreds of different organizations. Starting from the national organization. In Malta, we have the MCCAA, that is the organization who should be involved and is involved in developing standards, but we have organizations around Europe. We have AFNOR in France, BSI in the UK, we have UNIFO in Italy, and we have DIN in German. DIN. This is A4, you know, the format. It's in reality called DIN A4 because it was developed in German. And if you just fold it, it became an A5. And if you fold again, it became an A6. But if you double it, it became an A3. So you can go from A0 to A8. And if you go to Berlin, when the DIN headquarters is, and you just look on the floor when you take your lift, they've just put all the dimension of the DIN on the floor because they are very proud of it. But why is it so important standardizing the paper? Because you have printers, okay? You have a software for printers. If we didn't have a standardized dimension of the paper, we could have a lot of problem just communicating, printing, sending emails. Imagine sending a document to Jean-Paul from France to Malta, having a different format on different printers. It couldn't be possible. So standard is so important for that. And you find standard everywhere. And those are the national organizations that work with the standards, and they organize together, and at international level, so you say they create groups of organization. So you have an organization that, as I saw, that is very famous, that is based in Switzerland, and they do generally standard for physical stuff, okay? You go everywhere. The seat where we are sitting at the moment are going to respect, to comply at least with 3 or 4 different standards, because the dimension is standardized. In this way, the table can be, can go through the doors, etc., etc. Standardization is really important for that, and they do that. But then, whenever you talk about electronic stuff, okay, this is digital, but imagine it was electronic, it's IEC. So every plug you use is standardized with IEC, that is another organization that is also based in Switzerland. And we are going to see the majority of organizations. So we have ISO, we have ISC for everything related to electrical stuff. And at international level, we have an organization created not by national bodies, but just by industries. And this one is IEEE, okay? And they do standard, for example, whenever you use the Ethernet protocol, the Wi-Fi, okay? This was created by a group of experts. They were consultant or companies that put together, decided to create a standard, okay? But in this case, you do not have a national control. It's independent. There is another one that is very famous and is completely independent. It's the W3C. Whenever you use internet, you browse somewhere, you are using standards that are the hypertext, the HTML hypertext model markup language, the CSS, the XML, the XST. You have a lot of standards that are developed to navigate on the internet. And so while IEEE is based in New York, W3C is more international, so they have headquarters a bit everywhere. And then whenever you use a mobile, you have standards that are done by ITU, that is also based in Geneva, Switzerland. And why? Because can you imagine not having the same standard for the mobiles? We couldn't communicate. Okay? So we need standard, but in this case, at international level. In this case, is based by the United Nations, not by national bodies. Okay? So you start to see that standardization has got an impact in every aspect of your life. Okay, from mobiles to web to the chairs to a lift, everything. And this is at the international level. And now we are going at European level. And this is much less known, but is going to get a very important relevance in the future, at the moment in the future. So in Belgium, you have CEN, that is the European Committee for Standardization. In reality, is the acronym is in French, Comité Européen de Normalisation. And you have the CENELEC, the Comité Européen de Normalisation Électrotechnique. They correspond to ISO and IEC. Okay? So at the international level, you have ISO, IEC. At the European level, you have CEN and CEN-CENELEC. And at European level, you have also Ethicist, that is a group, it's more or less like IEEE at European level. It's a group of industry that are put together to create standards. Everybody's creating standards all the time, okay? And they are regulating everything. Just to give you an example of a very funny standard, there is a standard to how to organize a trip with children in buses. So there are standards for everything. You would say nobody's using that. Yes, but when you have an accident and dead people, you have like to have a standard for that. So this is a big picture, okay? There is a group of national bodies that alimент, just help to participate in CEN-CENELEC and IEC, ISO, ITU, ETS, and then professional. So these are those are specialized, those are formally recognized by governments, okay? It's a big difference from the two of them, but they are both important. What happened then? We are talking about physical, electronic, and then the digital arrived, the digital, okay? Who is doing the standard for the digital? There is a bit of physics, and there is a bit of electronic. So what they did, they create joint technical committee. And so they started to work together, ISO and IEC at the international level, and CEN-CENELEC at European level. Okay? That's interesting. They created the GTC, Joint Technical Committee, for artificial intelligence, for example, is the Joint Technical Committee 21. But at international level, just to give you the complexity, everything that is handling information technology standards is GTC 1, Joint Technical Committee 1. And that one, working with artificial intelligence, it's a subcommittee 42. So just to give you an idea, there are thousands of committees, subcommittees, working groups that are working for standard. Just to give you an idea of the importance, we organize, I'm part of both of them, we organize from two to three plenaries in Europe per year with GTC 21, and 2 plenaries per year around the world with GTC 1 SF42. Just in that subcommittee, we arrived to be between 150 and 300. Okay? That means that you are moving 300 people for a week somewhere in the world. In general, people that are staying in good hotels and good restaurants, so they are moving a lot of money. So if you like traveling, you have at least four international travel per year assured working in standard. But this is the situation. And for example, the Malta Competition and Consumer Affairs Authorities that is working on standard is part of the national committee that is working in Sensenelec and ISO. Okay? Any question? It's a bit complex at the moment. Just to open some parentheses about it, some bracket. At the beginning, when I started in standards, it was completely crazy for me because the curve of learning curve was really steep, yeah. But then you understand how all those standards are impacting the life of everybody, and how big companies understand that those standards are important because they are investing millions of euros in consultant in standards just to influence standards. Okay, but we can make the difference, or doing working in the European Parliament or doing standards. So it's another way to influence the process. So let's talk about artificial intelligence and what is the relation with the standards. The European Union wrote and approved the AI Act, the regulation on the artificial intelligence, and the regulation has got this small article, Article 42, you are compliant if you are compliant with the standards. Wonderful. Who is creating the standard? So the European Commission created the list of what they call standard requests. Okay? The list of 10 standard requests based on the regulation that they send to Sensenelec. The Sensenelec sends it to the Joint Technical Committee on Artificial Intelligence, and we are creating those standards. It's clear enough? I'm trying to simplify. Reality, you can imagine the complexity much more, but at least this is the big picture. And how it is composed, GTC 21. GTC 21 is composed by 5 working groups. Okay? The first working group is strategic. Okay? It's called SAG, Strategic Advisory Group. But from the second to the fifth one, we have a technical operative working group. The first one is working group 2, operational aspects, and they are working on 3 very important standards: the quality management, the risk management, and the conformity assessment. Then you have engineers that are working on very specific aspects like natural language processing, accurate natural language processing, biases and machine learning, logging, robustness, vision system, data governance, and quality for AI. So they are working in a technical way. They are the slowest of everybody. They haven't seen nothing at the moment, just in today. Then there is the third one, I jumped the fourth one, And this is the last one is working on cybersecurity. But everybody who knows a bit the history of cybersecurity knows that there is a lot of literature. We have the ENISA, it's a specific organization in Europe working on cybersecurity. So they produced a standard that is the technical solution to address AI-specific vulnerabilities very fast. And then there is this working group where I became the convener. So I entered in GTC 21. I worked with somebody that just left, and I don't know how I became the convener of this working group. In this working group, we are treating foundational and societal aspect of AI. So the standard, the most important standard we are working on is on trustworthiness. Okay, that is a fundamental concept in here. And but we have other standards like the competence of AI ethicists, ethics tool, ethics upskilling for developers, green AI, frugal AI, fundamental rights, and we have other two proposals that arrived just a few weeks ago, are critical infrastructures and labeling for system that has been changed, so that it should be labeled. So as you see, there is a very important complexity, and we are working a lot to produce the standard on time, because the regulation not only said that we had to produce standard, but also when to produce standard. And everybody is late, okay, just to be, and then regulation was late, so not only us, but only those two standards are the most advanced, so I'm quite happy that we produce something. Because at the beginning we create an architecture, and we say, there are 10 standard requests. So risk management, how we manage risks related to AI, then cybersecurity, robustness, accuracy, human oversight. I don't know if you just listen to that, you see the difference, but I maybe have a picture later that will show the difference between each of these concepts and make it clearer. So transparency, logging, data quality, quality management system, and conformity assessment. So we have all those standards, and we said, let's create an horizontal standard, trustworthiness, that should have been the entry point for everything. However, because a lot of standards were late, we became the gap filler of other standards. So we are at the moment covering 50% of the standards in this one. Then philosophically we can discuss what trustworthiness is, and there is a lot of discussion about it, but we simplified a lot. There is a vision of the European Commission, and we tried just to create a standard related to their vision. We accepted their level of abstraction without discussing it. And I'm personally also editor in an international level of this standard AI-enhanced nudging. I don't know if you know what nudges are. No? Nudges are all those mechanisms that you push you to make a decision instead of another one. Okay? And when they are enhanced by AI, they bring you to spend hours on the short on YouTube, just to make you an example. And they have a very important impact on, for example, democracy, for example, because they push people to see more, to enter in a kind of bubble, and so they have only some kind of information, and they are going to make a specific decision. So this standard started in Europe, and I saw that they asked to bring it at the international level, and nobody was thinking about this standard at the beginning. But what happened is that Trump was elected. So in my room, when I'm managing the standard, I started to have two experts that came, one from the FBI, another one for the Department of Justice. So it means that they started to understand that this kind of standard could have impacted in another way in the American democracy. So sometimes you have standards that are not very visible. Nobody is taking attention about it, but they have a very relevant impact in society. So the last two slides just to understand what I'm doing at the level of standards, okay? And that is a topic not sexy at all, quite boring. You generally avoid to talk about it with friends because it's so complex and not attractive at all. However, we talk about legislation and we talked about standards, okay? Now we have two elements. We have something that is a regulation created by the community, and the other one is a technical regulation. So they are called norms in Europe. The difference is that European standards have acronyms that is EN, European norms, while international standards have an acronym that is IS, international standards. Okay? And in Europe, we wanted to have the difference in ES and not call them IU. I don't know. Sorry, IE. I don't know. No, IES. Sorry, we changed the so in European norm. So we have those two elements, and we have a problem. We saw a lot of regulation. Legislative regulation and technical regulation. So everybody is saying at the moment, hey guys, we have too much regulation. We are not developing anything. So something raised the innovation, thinking that the standard and the regulation is stopping our innovation. And I think working in this field, that is a completely false myth. And why is that? This is the international market. This is a diagram we did a few years ago, but basically you clearly see that US and China are taking the market, okay? And they are saying, hey, you see Europe, very small, because of the regulation. But Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, Alphabet people, they were developed where in Europe we didn't have any regulation. So there is no reason to make a causality to the regulation. And the opposite, China has got a lot of regulation, and they are even stricter than in Europe. You just risk the jail if you do something that the government do not want you to put on the market. So they are very strict, and they are producing a lot of regulation every year. So they are doing new version on the regulation. So this is just a myth. And generally, my answer is the movie industry bigger in Europe or in US? Why is bigger in US than Europe in movie industry? It's not related to any regulation. On the opposite, in US you have a stricter regulation for movies than in Europe in general. But you have to think in an economical way. Not that I agree to that, but the reality is that US and China in particular, they're investing a lot in the military field. So everything invested in the military has got an impact in AI, in the digital, but also in movies. They are completely related. And generally, we do not do this relationship. But I would invite to think in a wider way and think that the problem in Europe is that we do not have concentrate capitals to do it, not that there are regulations. Because at the moment, the regulations are not yet active on AI, and we are still afraid to develop. So we'll have, I think, a lot of time to discuss. I'll try to go faster on it. When we talk about standards, and you go on an elevator, you have 50 standards inside. Okay? So, would you like to go in an elevator that is not regulated by standards? Yeah. You are going to risk a lot. Okay? When you are taking a flight, there are only in the cockpit more than 300 standards. So standards are fundamental for the life of every day. The important thing is how they are used. They are easier. Why they are easier? Because they are quantitative standards. And so now it's coming the complexity of AI. When you are measuring something in an elevator, you have to measure, the speed of the elevator, and you have to measure how slow is going down when the electricity is stopped, etc., etc. So you have measures that are shared by the industry generally, and that they are the best practices of the industry. So generally, standards are done after the technology is already used to make all the industry to communicate between them. With AI, it's changed a bit because we are trying to regulate something that is often not yet in the market. So that's the different. What happened anyway is that the myth that I was talking about arrived because you see there's a kind of tsunami of regulations that have been produced in Europe. But this tsunami of regulation is in a certain way moderated by the standards. That's why standards are becoming more and more important. The regulator is saying, I cannot write something that is viable in a short time. I need a technical standard to make it viable. So this is what happened until 2024, and we are going in 2022, because as you can see, a lot of different standards were produced. But we will see still a lot of standards. Just to give you an example, the UACT was produced, written before all the large language models, before the ChatGPT was put on the market. Okay? Everybody knows ChatGPT. So the European Commission found that the regulation wasn't covering large language model. So they started a new process, that is the code of practice, to create a specific code of practice for large language model. This is the complexity we are living at the moment. And there is another complexity that we are talking, we were discussing before about it, we are talking with a lot of terms that are polysemantic, so where anybody can put their own meaning. So during a meeting, you can find on the concept of robustness, two different people that are talking about two completely different subjects, because they came from different industry. For example, robustness for the automotive industry is completely different than robustness from vision in AI. Okay, vision detection in AI. Donc, so this is what happened, and I'm just checking something. I do not have here, but I'll show you later. And there is another point, and this is another thing that we live in Europe and we don't not know. Have you heard about the Brussels effect, saying the regulation that we are producing in Europe is going to have an international impact? Okay, and somebody saying, how can Europe have an international impact? Now I show you how we can using standard. There are two agreements, the Vienna Agreement and the Frankfurt Agreement. They are taking with a parallel. So signed with ISO and signed with IEC. And those agreements are saying this stuff. If one of these bodies is producing a standard, the other one should not produce a similar standard, but they have to adapt or adopt something that is already produced. So what is happening is, if ISO is producing a standard, in Europe we have to adopt or adapt this standard. We cannot produce a new one because it's going to simplify the market and the industry. But when we are producing something in Europe, they have to adopt or adapt our standard. And this is the effect that we have. And because the majority of the participants around the world are coming from Europe, and so we are working at two different levels, European and international level, we have an enormous impact in the international standardization. This is quite invisible. The majority of people do not know that we are working with that, but in reality we are. And sometimes we do something even more. We say we are doing a parallel development. So we start to work something in Europe, the international level say, oh, we are interested, and so we create a parallel development. The nudge standard that I showed before was developed in Europe and now is in ISO, but with parallel development. So that means that it's produced at the same time in Europe and international level. So this is the impact Europe is having at the international level. And this is why we are talking about EU as a standard setter. This is a phrase said by Thierry Breton, that was the EU commissioner of the market, and he understood the importance, the relevance of being somebody who could create standard. Because creating standards is creating a market, okay, not giving the rules. So just a funny history that we used to say in standard. Do you know that the bomb are related to the hearts of the horse? A bomb is related to the hearts of a horse. Why? Because generally you have two hearts of horses to create create the space for the locomotive. Okay, because before was trained by horses, so the space was two horses. So they created the locomotive and the space of the railway in this way. Then the problem is you have tunnels, okay? And the tunnels are created always related to the base with the two arms of the horse. Then when they had created the bomb for the Second World War, the problem was that the bomb should be transported through the tunnel. So there is a direct relation between the arms of the horse and the dimension of the horse. So just to understand how everything is connected and we cannot even see. So for Europe creating the right space for their market, it means managing the market. And it's really important. From the industry point of view, somebody an industry that can create a standard became the winner for a period in the market. The most famous example is the CD-ROM, okay? The CD, in reality. The dimension of the CD was standardized before other elements, or other devices, so the industry that produced more of the readers were the leader of the market for a while. And the person who arrived to do it received a very big check. Yeah. But anyway, this is from the industry point of view. From the regulator point of view, it's saying we have a quite unique single market. If we are right to regulate everything, we can influence the world. Why? Because we are the second market in the world, Europe. The first one is US, and the third one is China, okay? So because we are the second market in the world, everybody is saying, no, we don't mind about Europe, no, US and China. But that's not true at all, because the Chinese cannot sell in US, and US cannot sell in China, so we stay a very important market, strategic market in Europe. And so we are just playing with that market and say, okay, we are the market, you want to sell your product in Europe, you have to follow our rules. It's a big fight. It's not simple. There is a lot of corruption at the European level. Sometimes you see companies that are accused to corrupt somebody, but this is the situation. And I'm a very big fan of this approach, the European approach. I'm a defender of it. And why? Because Europe is giving a new way to produce those standards. Before standards are voluntary. You are not obliged to comply with the standard. However, if you want to have your USB used everywhere, you have to comply with the standard, so you can use it in all your computers. So it's a market that imposes you to be compliant. But in general, they are done by industry. So in the digital, you have Microsoft, AWS, so Amazon, Meta, Google, you have big industry, Huawei, Sony, that are working for that. And the European Commission said, no, wait, the European market is a specific market. It's not like the US or China. In our market, we have consumer, and we put a lot of importance of the right of consumers. But we also have workers, and we put a lot of importance on workers. And it's intelligent because instead of saying we do a new technology, take off workers, we say we include workers in the decision. Because if they do not want to develop AI, we will not develop anything. So it's important to have consumer who will buy your technology, so you have the money to invest. And it's important that workers will be favorable to your new technology, because if they do not do it, they are going on strike, and you cannot do anything. You cannot do the same kind of strike in US or China. Okay, that's very important to take into account. Then we consider our citizens with rights. So we highlighted European values in our standards, something that we cannot do at international level. And we want to highlight fundamental rights also. Just to give you an example, whenever a standard moves from EU to international level, everything you talk about fundamental rights, you are bombarded, just grounded by other countries that do not even want to listen about fundamental rights. But in Europe, they are important. We can quote it, and we are protecting them. It's so important that the European Commission is financing ANEC, and ANEC is the international, it's a European Association for Consumer. So they are working with us for creating writing standard. And the other one is the ETUC, and they are the European Association for Workers. So as you can see, the European Commission has got a vision about it. They do not talk a lot about their vision, but there is a vision. Maybe they not even know, but there is a vision. And so I do appreciate this, because they are pushing to have different people in the room, not only the industry. This can cause problems. Inclusivity causes problems because you have people that is not at the same technical level, but at the same time it's a challenge. And in my personal group, I was the only one to do it, but it's my maybe my philosophical approach. From the very beginning, we tracked everything about the inclusion, even the gender inclusion, to see if we were right balanced, and we were. And so our data were used by Sensenelec to show everybody how they should track everything. And it's good to do it because if you see that is a low participation of a gender, you can push to increase the participation. If you just do not track it, you will never do it. So it's, and the same with, we are tracking researcher, industry, so that there is a good balance, not 80% of industry. We have a very good balance in every category. And now, let's talk about ethics and how is impacting it. So I haven't prepared it for this slide, but before talking about ethics, I will show you another thing. Sorry for that. Something that I should show in another class, but I think that it's important to show you it now. Okay. We were talking about trustworthiness and saying trustworthiness is based on characteristics. So trustworthiness is generally something that is very difficult to define, okay? It's, I'm quoting Florida at the moment, it's like pornography. Everybody knows what is it, but defining it, it's quite complex. And trustworthiness is the same thing. How can we trust somebody? There are a lot of literature about it, but it is a simple way to do it, is to find some proxy variables, okay? And the proxy variables can be the attitude of the person, the fact that it is transparent, the fact that it's not hiding anything, etc., etc. May I take your mobile? If, for example, I'm reading my mobile and my wife came to me and I just hide my mobile every time she comes to me, even if there is nothing, the attitude is lowering the level of trust. So trust is about proxy variables. The European community chooses some proxy variables. That doesn't mean that it's 100% covered, but at least it's a good start. They choose some variables and say, okay, if you are respecting those proxy variables, then we can trust your product. And so I like analogies, like every good philosopher, and I use generally this analogy of the restaurant to explain what the UA Act is about. Basically, you imagine to be in a restaurant, and there is a generally management of the restaurant. This means that the restaurant is managed in a correct way. But then you have some variables like risk. Tracking allergens in the menus. Okay, this is going to reduce the risk because you are asking people if they are allergic to something. The quality, data quality is like the product. The quality of the product is they are products that are natural, without any kind of chemical product, etc., etc. So the quality of the product to prepare my food is really important to have a good dish. Then the record are the logging for AI, but in a restaurant it's the retention sample. Anytime you are producing something, you take a sample and you put in the fridge. So if there is a control, we know where the problem was. Transparency. Transparency is, in the majority of the literature about ethics, is considered an ethical principle. In reality, it's a meta-ethical principle. And that's because transparency can be a detailed menu, but it can be also the space where the chef is working. I can see what he's doing, so I can trust it. But you have to realize that the lower part is never visible. And there is a reason. I want to see something, but not everything. Okay? And this transparency is the same in democracy. Whenever you go to vote, your vote is secret. It's not transparent. It was transparent, it wasn't a democracy. Okay, so transparency is a meta principle. You have to use the right level, or is just create the opposite effect. Then cybersecurity means the client and workers are safe. Then there are two: accuracy, robustness, and because I'm basically Italian, I use the pasta alla carbonara as an example for those elements. So whenever accuracy is the precision of the recipe. Whenever I go to a restaurant, if it is cream in the menu, pasta alla carbonara is not a real pasta alla carbonara. Okay? So you have they put the right ingredients in the pasta alla carbonara, and this accuracy. Robustness is the consistency of that. It means that I go to the restaurant, they do the right recipe, but today is plenty of people and the quality is lower. This is robustness. The robustness is maintaining the same accuracy all the time, okay? And then we have a human oversight, okay? It's creating trust, the fact that I know that there is somebody behind that is stopping the process if something is wrong. So this is the human oversight in general. In this case, the chef. And then you have the conformity assessment. You have an independent organization that is coming to the restaurant and checking everything. So in this case, you are creating trust. Okay? It's not a trust in a philosophical view, but you are using a few proxy variables to determine trust. And we think that it is sufficient for what we have to do with this technology. It's clear enough until now? Yes. And now, why ethics is relevant because it was very boring maybe, but it's really important to create the context. And why is ethics so important? So we have regulation and standard. Easy enough. In both of them, we have some principles, but we have a lot of uncertainty. And the uncertainty created by regulation and standard is in the word they are using for writing the regulation or for writing the standard. So that means that if they are creating uncertainty, certain type of uncertainty can be coped with a technological approach, regulatory approach, but then you have the ethical uncertainty, well, what is called creating ethical dilemma. I don't like the word, I will explain another time why not, but anytime you have ethical problem, how to cope with those ethical problems is creating uncertainty. Now, what an industry do not want is uncertainty. So they pay lawyers, they pay engineers to lower the level of uncertainty, okay? And they're starting to pay ethicists to lower the level of ethical uncertainty. So basically the standard and the regulation are necessary, but what I used to say all the time, they are not sufficient. So you can have those, but on those standards you have words, and you have in adjective and adverbs that are qualitative. You have something like, it should be reasonable, it should be commensurate, we should choose the right level of autonomy, it should be sustainable, it shouldn't be unacceptable, it should be significant. Okay, all those. This is ethics, without using the word ethics. Those words, those adjectives, you need ethics to make a decision all the time, okay? Because you cannot, so in the automotive you have a 5 level of autonomy, okay? But only in automotive. In any other kind of AI, you can, to choose the level of autonomy of a user, or of a controller, it's an ethical choice, okay? Because it changes related to the context. And whenever you are making a decision of this kind, you can do it basically in three different ways. You can do it in an implicit way, so you are choosing, nobody's saying that you are doing an ethical choice, so you do whatever, okay, without knowing what you are doing. Another one is common sense. So you are doing it, you create a committee of people that should choose if it's commensurate or not. But because they are not professional people or professional ethicists, they use common sense. Can be good, but no, not always. Common sense, just to give you an example, is like the recipe of the grandmother for the cancer, okay? Not always working very well, okay? Can be good when you have a small problem, can be very dramatic with a big problem. And the third one is working in an explicit way. Explicit way signifies that you are taking into account that whenever you are talking about reasonable, you are making an ethical deliberation. An ethical deliberation implies a long process. So basically you are defining if the choice is binary or not, defining the pros and cons, tracking the decision you are taking, tracking if the decision is grounded with engineers, so it's applied in the process, tracking if after a while the decision is still updated, etc., etc. It's not just taking a decision, okay? And whenever you take those decisions, you are doing ethics, even if you are not using the word ethics. And for doing that, you need the competence, the basic competence, ethical competence of developers. It's normal, it's not sufficient. It's like saying, I'm doing a diet, it's not working, but I'm not a doctor because I'm doing a diet. Because I'm aware of the kind of food I'm eating, it doesn't mean that I'm a doctor. So it's important. The skill or the awareness of the developers is not sufficient. Tools are very important, but as every tool, you need to know how to use the tool, okay? I don't know if you ever work at home with something, you have plenty of tools. But for example, I do not know how to use those tools, so I do not do bricolage, okay? It's easy. But then you have ethicists that knows what should be the level of awareness and how to use tools and when to use the right tools. That's why we need ethicists in this process. And so I like to say that ethics is for reducing the residual uncertainty. So generally in risk, we reduce the residual risk. Whenever you do a risk analysis, you arrive to residual risk because you cannot have zero risk. It's impossible. So you have a risk, but you reduce the residual risk. And ethics is going to reduce the residual uncertainty. And the residual uncertainty is done by language, type of concepts that are used, okay? Just to give you an example, whenever I enter in a company and they are starting to say, we are developing an ethical AI, okay? From a philosophical point of view, ethical AI doesn't mean anything because something ethically is an alignment with a set of values, okay? It's nothing, so if you do not have the set of values, you are aligned with what? I don't know, okay? I don't know, a terrorist, okay, who is killing people is aligned with this set of values. And so he's behaving ethically from his point of view. But this is, I'm talking about the technical approach of ethics. So using the wrong words bring to or as always, the wrong solutions. That's why we have to work a lot with companies to redefine the language and to know how to treat those problems. And basically, ethics does three things. It helps to work on the gray areas, so understanding where the ethical decisions should be made. Wrongly enough, the majority of people think that an ethicist enter in a company and they are making decisions like what is good or bad. Okay? This is not our role. I'm not God. My ethical deliberation is not more valuable than anybody else. Okay? What I know are the tools and techniques that help people to make a decision. And if I made a decision for a company, I'm entering in a conflict of interest. So I'm going to defend my decision. And this is very dangerous for my position. So I avoid to make a decision for a company. But I help them to make a decision. But so the first thing is not deciding what is wrong or bad, what is wrong or good. The first decision I made generally is where to put the resources to make a decision. Okay, just to simplify very, very easily. We are facing, we are in a moral situation, but there is not a moral weight at the moment. So there is not the need to call an ethical board to judge this situation. Okay, but in other situations there is the need to call an ethical board. So the first decision is when we have to do ethics, because we cannot do ethics everywhere and all the time. So we just specify where there is not the law, we can always make the decision. It's not because there is not the law that we do not make a decision. They can have consequences, reputational consequences in the middle term, and sometimes have an economical impact that is very important. And then fillable area, where gaps exist, they need to be filled. So even if the law and the regulation and the standard exist, we have still gaps. And so this is going to reduce also the economic uncertainty. I'm working to make industry understand that ethics make them produce more product and make more money, and this is not a competition. It's not ethicists that are just stopping what they are doing. We should help them to do what they are doing in the right way. That's it. Okay, if they feel as our competitors, then we cannot work with them. And so, and this is the final one, I honestly think that ethics can reborn as an economic driver for the years to come. And thank you very much.